right, so welcome everyone. This recorded presentation is for the Flexible Support Grant at the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council. This grant is due on October 21st, 2024 by 11:59 Central Time. This recording will be shared on our YouTube channel where you can change the subtitle language and playback speed. And we're also going to share it on our Flexible Support webpage. Today we have our two ASL interpreters, Deanna and Alan, and our two lead program directors for this grant, which are myself, Mireya Espino, and then Sagira Shahid. And with that, I will pass it over to Sagira.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, or MRAC for short. So this webinar is for our fiscal year 2025 Flexible Support Grant. Like Maria said, my name is Sagira Shahid, and I'm one of two program directors for this grant program. Before we begin, I want to make sure that you know how to reach me and my colleague Maria Espino, who is also a program director for this grant. So I'm just going to share a little bit of information about who we are and our contact information. Also, throughout this presentation, Maria will do the same. We'll describe text and non-decorative images that appear throughout the presentation to ensure this presentation is accessible. So this slide is entitled, Welcome and Meet Your Flexible Support Program Directors. On this screen, there are two photos. To the left is a picture of me. I have a shoulder length, textured afro in the picture. I'm wearing a red scarf and I have glasses on and I'm smiling. And my contact information below is my pronouns are she, her, and then also my contact information, my email is Sagira, so that's SAGIRAH @mrac.org. And then my phone number is 651-523-6381. And then to the right of me is a picture of my colleague, Maria. Her pronouns are she, her. And then there's a picture of her she's smiling. She has long, dark hair, and she has earrings on, and she has a plant in the background, and she's wearing black. And her direct email is mirella@mrac.org. And then her phone number is 651-523-6380. Maria and I are going to be your primary contacts for the Flexible Support Grant Program. You can reach out to us with any questions or concerns throughout your grant application process. We are here to help you. So now I'm moving on to the next slide. This slide is entitled Agenda. So on this slide, we'll discuss our agenda for today's presentation. Our presentation is divided into 5 sections. First, I will give you a brief overview of MRAC. Following that, Maria and I will discuss our resources. Then, we will give you an overview of our Flexible Support Grant Program. After that, we will review eligibility and ineligible applicants. Finally, we'll switch back and forth, sharing our screens to demonstrate the submission process. And we'll also highlight a few reminders. We'll also discuss what to do if you or your group is awarded a flexible support grant. So now we'll move on to the next slide. And so this slide is entitled About MRAC. There's also an image to the right of the text, and it has a combination of multicolored images and symbols to signify wildlife and art in Minnesota. And below that image, there is a text that reads Clean Water and Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment. So now I'll read the text, the remainder text on the screen about MRAC. So our mission at MRAC is to improve arts access for the Twin Cities metro communities through support to artists and organizations. As one of the 11 regional arts councils in Minnesota, MRAC's funding is derived primarily from appropriations from the Minnesota State Legislature, with money from the state's general fund and Arts and Culture Heritage Fund. Thank you, Minnesota voters, for supporting arts access in this way. MRAC also receives a generous grant from the McKnight Foundation to support some of our programs. And then we'll move on to the next slide. So this slide is entitled Resources and Grant Overview. So this is just a friendly reminder that you can review the resources and learn more about the support MRAC offers you for this grant program by revisiting the Flexible Support Guidelines, pages 1 through 4. There, you can also get an overview of this grant program. In the next slide, Maria will go more in depth regarding the resources we provide at MRAC. So I'll pass it over to Maria.
All right, thank you, Sagira. All right, so we're on the next slide. This one is titled Resources. There are 6 resources listed here that will help you prepare for your flexible support proposal. First and most importantly, we have the Flexible Support Guidelines. This is highlighted in blue to emphasize that everyone should review this if you're deciding to apply at MRAC. The Flexible Support Guidelines are a rule book or a manual. It's to help inform you about everything you could possibly have to know about this grant. And this is the first opportunity where I will be switching my screen so that I can show you where to find the guidelines and what they look like. And so we're going to go to our home page. Let me pull it up. I paused the recording not the recording, the screen share. Okay, so here we have MRAC's webpage, the first homepage. What you'll do is you'll hover over Apply for Grants, and then you'll go to Flexible Support. Here on our webpage, you will find a bunch of important documents, and you can go to the grant guidelines, and you will find the guidelines here in English and Spanish in different formats like Word, PDF, RTF. And then this is what the guidelines will look like. So I'm scrolling all the way up to the first page. And with that, I will go back to the presentation. So that's the first resource. Then we have the grant information webinar, and that's this recording, which will be available again on our YouTube channel and the Flexible Support webpage, which I just showed y'all. I will also skip over to the YouTube page so you can see what that will look like. So this is our YouTube channel. And going back to the presentation. All right, so now we're going to have 3 links here for you on this slide here, slide 6. We will make this presentation available to y'all so you can go back and click on these links. All of these links are also in the guidelines, and I'll make sure to show where you can find those. If at any point you have issues finding these links, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But because those links are available, will be available, we won't be reading them out loud. But again, if that becomes an issue for you, just please reach out and we'll reshare them with you. So here, the third bullet point is the submittable tech support. This is if you have any questions related to your grant application or our grant application interface. So think about questions like, I forgot my password. How do I find my past applications? Or how do I find this application, the Flexible Support 2025 application? Submittable tech support is there to help y'all. The fourth resource is the question and answer sessions. And so it's highlighted in orange, again, to emphasize the importance. Our question and answer sessions will be hosted via Zoom. The first session is on September 10th from 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time. And this one's especially tailored for first-time MRAC applicants. Then we have a second session on October 10th from 6 to 7 p.m. Central Time. And that's for open to everyone. You can drop in at any point during the hour. And so before moving on, I will screen share again. I will switch over to the guidelines so I can demonstrate, and our webpage, so I can demonstrate where you can find all of these links to register or find tech support. So I'm going to the webpage. All right, so this is the page we were on before. To find links on how to register for those two events, you will go down to the important dates. And then we want to emphasize some submittable resources. So the grant information will also be shared here, like we mentioned earlier, along with the presentation slides. And then here is where we have some links. This is where you will apply or log in to apply. And then the next link here is a tutorial created by Submittable on like some how-tos when navigating in Submittable. The last link that's also on the presentation slide as a resource is this Google form. And this isn't open yet, but it will launch on August 26th. And that is when folks can start reaching out. We really encourage folks to use this link. Flexible support is MRAC's largest program. It is nearly 100% of all the dollars that we distribute. And so lots of folks reach out, and we love this. This is our way of organizing that and dividing the work up amongst ourselves. So, and then all of this information is also available in the guidelines. And I just switched my screen over, so now we are in the guidelines. And like I mentioned, if you go to page 3, you will find links to register for the Q&A sessions. And some submittable links are also in here. And so on the next page, so page 4. All right, and with that, one last thing I want to mention here is on our YouTube channel, we also have a video titled Resources and Grants at MRAC. If you're interested in finding out more about those resources, go ahead and watch the video there. In Spanish, it's called Recursos y Subvenciones por parte de MRAC. And with that, I am going to pass it to Segura.
Thank you, Maria. So this slide is entitled Language and Disability Accessibility. I'm going to read what's on the screen. Applicants are encouraged to apply to their preferred language. With advance notice, MRAC can contact an interpreter and/or a translator to assist during the application process. Contact a flexible support director at least 1 week prior to the October 21st deadline for assistance. Applicants with disabilities are encouraged to request access-related support from MRAC. Applicants with disabilities encountering barriers to our typical process can work with MRAC staff to ensure you have equal opportunity to support an application. To begin a conversation about how we can help, please contact the Flexible Support Program Directors before the October 21st deadline, at least 1 week prior for assistance. So now we'll move on to the next slide. I'm going to pass it back over to Maria.
All right, thank you, Segura. So this next slide is titled Grant Overview. This is a very flexible grant. So funding specifically for organizations/groups to create and sustain Minnesotans' access to the arts. We're going to elaborate on the types of eligible projects in the next slide, but in general, eligible projects include operations and/or organizational capacity and/or arts programming. And in total, we will redistribute $4 million. On this next slide, this is slide 2 of 2, also titled Grant Overview. And here, all eligible groups applying for this grant may request up to $15,000. We have a special attention message here for groups that are led by 51% or more, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and/or disabled people / people with disabilities, and/or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual / agender, two-spirited. Groups led by these communities, 51% or more, they may request up to $25,000. And with that, we will go to the next slide. All right, so as promised, this is the slide where we're going to elaborate on the types of eligible projects. So eligible projects will create and sustain Minnesotans' access to the arts through operations, organizational capacity, and/or arts programming proposals. We listed some examples here. So for operations, this could look like paying for staff salaries. Organizational capacity, this could look like rebranding, building a website, overhauling financial tracking systems, purchasing equipment, and/or making facility improvements. Arts programming could be a single arts and/or cultural event or a series of workshops or events. Or it could be any combination of these that helps your organization / group create and sustain participants' access to the arts. And so when defining your project or program, your group could choose to do a first-time event or activity, a recurring annual or seasonal event, or an activity supporting the organizational capacity and/or operations of the group. But just please make sure that it clearly falls within the eligible funding period. And we'll emphasize this over and over throughout this presentation. So that funding period is May 1st, 2025 to May 31st, 2026. All right, on this next slide, it is titled Grant Timeline. And we start at the left with applicant services. And so this is where program directors are available to discuss your group / organization and/or project eligibility. And this will officially start on August 26th. This is really the time to ask us anything and everything, because once the deadline hits, we don't allow for edits. Please note that as program directors, we do not determine who receives funding. So again, don't be shy about your questions. Go ahead and ask, and we'd rather catch any potential red flags early in the process. So hopefully y'all can pivot. Our deadline is the next bullet point or major moment in this grant timeline, and that is for our fiscal year 2025 flexible support. Our deadline is Monday, October 21st, 2024 at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. So the very next day, that's when program directors start to read and verify eligibility for all submissions. From that point on, ineligible applicants are notified and eligible applications are sent to panelists for review and score. So this is the next major phase in the timeline. Panelists will review and score, and typically they review 20 to 25 applications. And they score based on our criteria, which I will show next. And this document is on our website, and I will switch screens to share that with y'all. So right now you should be seeing the criteria, and you can find this document by going to our flexible support webpage and scrolling down to other grant documents. it is the second bullet point right here. All right, so now we're back at the presentation. If you're interested in volunteering, you can find the link here. And actually, Sagira, could we pause the presentation for a second? All right, so now we are back from that little break and we have switched interpreters. So we're still on the same slide here with the grant timeline. And I was at the panel review phase. So if you're interested in volunteering, please go to the slide 11. We have a link there for you to sign up. We're always looking for folks to make this entire process possible. So with that, I am moving on to the next step or the next big phase here in our timeline. And that is once all the panelists score, we rank, and then on April 22nd, MRAC's Board of Directors approve grants. From here, we move to the eligible funding period. Again, we've already mentioned it once, but we will repeat this over and over again. It's super important that y'all keep all your project activities and spend all the funds within this timeline or this grant period. And so that is May 1st, 2025. That's when you can start your project officially. And this is when notifications go out. And from there, you can, another note is you don't have to start on that date. And that can be based on when you want your project to start, but it also could be based on whether or not you have a final report due. And we'll talk about those later, but for sure, all activities and all money, that all has to be spent no later than May 31st, 2026. That is the latest end date that you can select. All right, and then these next few items aren't on the timeline, but they're important, so we want to uplift them here. And that is, this year we are hosting on May 6th, 2025, from 1 to 2 p.m. We're going to host an online optional webinar titled, "You Received an MRAC Grant, Now What?" There's a lot of information that we'll share, obviously, during this presentation, and one of them is what happens if you get an award. We understand that it can be a lot of information, and it can feel overwhelming when you receive that email notification. And we wanted to hold space where we can go through all those things and just refresh everyone's memory on what the next steps look like. And if you are awarded a grant, you will receive a registration link and all that information in your grant notification email on May 1st. And so lastly, final reports are due 2 months after the end date you choose an applicant. And we'll show where you would select that end date. All right, so we paused the presentation. It's possible that my audio or video is glitching. My internet has not been great. We had some outages, and now I turned off my video. Hopefully that helps with the quality. And with that, we'll move on to the next slide. And I'll pass it over to Sagira.
Thank you, Maria. So now we're going to move on to our third section entitled Eligible and Ineligible Applicants. Information for this section can be found on pages 5 through 11 of the Flexible Support Guidelines. And I will move on to the next slide. So this slide is entitled Reminders. So we just wanted to talk about a few reminders for you all. The first one is MRAC staff reviews all applications for eligibility after the deadline. As the largest grant program at MRAC, our reviews take several weeks. Additionally, we make sure to review the flexible support guidelines carefully. During our review, MRAC staff may find parts of our application or the entire application ineligible. So we want you to review the guidelines carefully. I also want to acknowledge on the next part of this slide is that we want you to pay attention to your emails and to your submittable messages. Sometimes we contact you throughout our review process. We might have clarifying questions that we want to ask or things that we need in order to prepare your application for the next step. And so just keep in mind that we contact through email, but sometimes we also contact through submittable, which should automatically email you. But that's something just to keep in mind after the deadline. And then we'll move on to the next slide. So on this slide, it's entitled Eligibility Geographic. And then I'm going to read what's on the slide and also do an image description. So I'll do the image description first. To the right-hand side, you'll see a map of the region that we serve, of the 7 counties that we serve. It's a multicolored map. And it has the title or the names of each of those counties. So the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council serves 7 county metro areas, meaning in all cases, a group must have its primary address in Anoka, Carver, Dakota, Hennepin, Ramsey, Scott, or Washington County. To be eligible to receive flexible support funding, use the address your organization has registered with the IRS. Only organizations with a 501c3 status may use a PO box as an address, if that matches what is registered with the IRS. Groups with fiscal sponsors are not permitted to include PO boxes. So now we'll move on to the next slide.
All right, so this slide is titled Eligibility Types of Groups. The following information, when we say types of groups, my camera's off, but I would be using air quotes because I want to emphasize that this might be a very MRAC term or word. When I start listing these off, hopefully they make more sense. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and you can refer to all of this information by going to the guidelines on pages 5 and 6. And so our first type of group is considered an arts 501c3 nonprofit organization. And this type of group is eligible if your annual cash expenses are of $400,000 or less during the most recently completed fiscal year. I will repeat that over and over. This is a common issue that we have. You want your most recently completed fiscal year, not the fiscal you are currently in. Now, our second type of eligible type of group would be the cultural 501c3 nonprofit organizations with annual cash arts programming expenses of $400,000 or less during the most recently completed fiscal year. So an example of this, if your fiscal year runs from January 1st to December 31st, your most recent fiscal year would be ending on December 31st of 2023. And so cultural nonprofit organizations, you must be able to isolate your arts programming expenses from non-arts financial activity. The third type of eligible groups are considered non-arts and non-cultural 501c3 nonprofit organizations with annual cash arts programming expenses of $400,000 or less. Again, for the most recently completed fiscal year, and you also have to be able to isolate any arts programming expenses from non-arts and non-cultural financial activity. We're going to skip fiscally sponsored, and I'll come back to that one. So the fifth eligible group is public entities. So those are defined as a unit of state, local, or tribal government with annual cash arts programming of expenses of $400,000 or less during, again, your most recently completed fiscal year. And again, you have to be able to isolate these arts programming expenses from non-arts financial activity. Our sixth eligible type of group are the community education units with annual cash arts programming expenses of any size during your most recently completed fiscal year. Again, not the one you're currently in, the one you recently completed. And you had to be able to isolate your arts programming expenses from non-arts expenses. All right, so again, you noticed that I skipped over fiscally sponsored groups, and I did so because we're going to talk a little bit more about them. So not only on this slide, but the next. So fiscally sponsored groups are groups with art projects, and they must consist of at least 3 people who are on a leadership team. And again, as a group, y'all's total annual cash expenses have to be $400,000 or less during the most recently completed fiscal year. And we'll talk more about this on the next slide. So we'll move on to that. This one is titled Attention Fiscally Sponsored Groups. For you to have an eligible fiscal sponsor, your fiscal sponsor must be registered with the IRS as a federally tax-exempt 501c3 nonprofit, have a Minnesota address, with an active registration with the Minnesota Secretary of State as a nonprofit organization, and they must submit a completed fiscal sponsor form in Submittable before the grant deadline. Fiscal sponsor forms submitted after the grant deadline are ineligible. And so how this is going to work is, as an applicant, as a fiscally sponsored group, you do not have an EIN number. You are not a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so you don't have an IRS letter, or you don't have these requirements. That is why you would get a fiscal sponsor, and the check would go to them. And so when applying as this type of group, and I will demonstrate this in the application, but I also want to review it here with everyone, is that you will select a fiscally sponsored as your type of group, and then a form will branch from that. And so that is where you will enter in the email of your fiscal sponsor contact in part 2 of the submission. So your fiscal sponsor contact will then receive an email with a link to the form and Submittable. We strongly encourage you to start this process with your fiscal sponsor well ahead of the deadline. If you don't have a fiscal sponsor, I often encourage folks to do this first. Like build that relationship, establish that, and there are several different organizations that can act as a fiscal sponsor. Springboard for the Arts is often one that folks use, but we've seen other 501c3 nonprofit organizations fulfill this role. And I will show what that form will look like in a second. Again, your fiscal sponsor will do all this via Submittable, but they actually don't have to have an account to submit it. What this form does is it tasks the fiscal sponsor with the responsibility of filling out the required information that they should have access to. And this would verify that you do have an active fiscal sponsor relationship and that they are eligible to act as a fiscal sponsor here at MRAC. Again, they should submit this form. Your fiscal sponsor should submit this form by the deadline day. You will be able to see if they've submitted the form as an applicant in your application. And with that, one last reminder, and then I will show you what the form looks like. So it's super important to note that your fiscal sponsor may have other MRAC applicants they are representing. If you're eligible in every other way, we really recommend that you encourage we encourage you to obtain your fiscal sponsorship first. And if you have a fiscal sponsor that you've used before and you have that relationship, please begin engaging with them 2 to 3 weeks ahead of the grant deadline so that your fiscal sponsor has ample time to complete the information contained in the fiscal sponsor form. All right, so now we're switching over. And give me 1 second. I have so many tabs open. All right, here we go. This is a fiscal sponsor form. This is what will be sent to your fiscal sponsor. We have a template form here with a message, and they'll enter in today's date, the name, their EIN, because they again should be a 501c3 nonprofit. They'll enter in their address. We do want them to have a Minnesota address. And like we mentioned, they have to have an active registration with the Minnesota Secretary of State. So this is where they would upload that file, your contact information, and then they can submit the form. Later during this presentation, we will demonstrate how to send this form to your fiscal sponsor, but I won't get ahead of myself. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. And I will pass it over to Sagira.
Thank you, Maria. So now I'm going to talk about ineligible applicants. This slide is entitled Ineligible Applicants. And there are 8 ineligibilities. I'm going to read them off. So the first one is individuals can't apply to MRAC's Flexible Support Grant. It's for groups or organizations. So unfortunately, you can't apply as an individual. And then the second one is an ineligible applicant would be someone located outside of Anoka, Carver, Dakota, Hennepin, Ramsey, Scott, or Washington counties. So you have to be in our region in order to be eligible for our funding. Now I'm going to read number 3. So public, private, alternative, charter, transitional, or homeschools are also ineligible applicants. Schools are defined as groups or organizations that provide K-12 education that meets state education requirements and post-secondary education leading to a degree or accreditation. So schools have their own funding and we don't support that at MRAC. So now I'll read number 4. Organizations or groups whose main purpose is to raise funds for another person or organization or cause. So no fundraising here is ineligible. And then number 5, organizations or groups that will not be the entity with the primary responsibility for the project. So if you're not the primary person for those responsibilities, you're ineligible. And then we're going to go on to number 6. Organizations or groups may not have more than one flexible support grant award at the same time. So only one grant per grant program. And then number 7 is organizations or groups with overdue final reports at the time of application. So I just want to highlight a couple of things before we move on to the final ineligibilities. Just an attention to returning applicants regarding number 6 and 7. It can be trickier and often harder to understand. So we strongly recommend that you contact myself or Maria if you do have any open grants at MRAC. I will share some more information for returning applicants in the next slide. And then the last ineligibility or thing that will make an applicant ineligible for this particular funding is organizations or groups that received a legislative appropriation or a legislative mandate grant directly from the state of Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund in 2024. They are automatically ineligible to receive MRAC's funding for the duration of their appropriation funds. And we'll talk more about this later on. This is a new eligibility requirement or ineligibility factor with MRAC. So we'll move on to the next slide. And then Maria will talk about information for returning applicants.
All right, thank you, Sagira. So here we have the title for this slide highlighted in blue, and that title is Attention Returning Applicants. So if you don't have an open MRAC grant or you've never applied to MRAC, please go ahead and skip to slide 21. And so first and foremost, folks with an overdue final report at the time of application are ineligible. Then folks with any open grant, please remember that you may not include project activities and or expenses that are included in another open or pending MRAC grant, as a project or program can only be funded by one MRAC grant. Now for flexible support 2024 awardees, so the most recent round of awardees, we have some special notes for you here. So if your proposal end date is on or after April 30th, 2025, and you anticipate completing your proposed activities and spending all the grant funds before that original proposal end date that you submitted, please go ahead and submit a project change request. The link is on this slide, and that's slide 18. This is also in the guidelines. So submit that project change by October 14th, 2024. We do have to approve it before you can submit your application. However, if you don't anticipate finishing your activities or spending all the money, and that happens, you have an end date that's on or after May 1st, 2025, you would be ineligible for this grant round. It goes back to the ineligible applicant slide that Sagira just read, where you cannot have more than one open flexible support grant at a time. You have to close one out before you can receive another. And this, again, if you want us to review anything or talk through any of this, please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, and with that, I'm moving on to the next slide. On this one, it is titled Fiscal Year 2023, Arts Impact for Groups and Flexible Support Grantees with Open Grants. Final reports were due August 30th, 2024. So that's coming up. And anyone who has not submitted this report will be ineligible to apply. Again, if you have an overdue final report, you have to submit that before you can apply again at MRAC. You can submit your final report via Submittable. And we have it linked here too on slide 20. I believe this is, nope, slide 19. And the final, again, yeah, final report has to be approved by us before you can submit a new application. So I wanted to uplift that here. And with that, I'll pass it to Sagira.
I was on mute. Everybody off mute, right? This slide is entitled More a New FY2025 Eligibility Requirements and Beyond at MRAC. I'm going to read the slides. So organizations or groups who have received a legislative appropriation or legislative mandate grant directly from the state of Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund are ineligible to receive MRAC funding for the duration of their appropriation funding. So this is a new policy. It's not to be confused with applicants who receive the state arts board funding. So if you receive a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, you're still eligible to apply for MRAC funding. This is particularly for groups who are directly getting into that appropriation funding. However, it's new and it's a little bit confusing for some folks, so no worries. Again, just contact Maria or myself, and we're happy to answer any questions or talk about anything that you have any confusion or need clarity on regarding this. But this is just a reminder, and then we can go on to the next slide. So now I'm going to talk about submissions. And we'll talk about flexible support guidelines. And this is our submission process is located in the flexible support guidelines, pages 5 through 25. So in this section, we will discuss what to do to actually apply for MRAC funding, along with some visual step-by-step reviews of how to do this, with some reminders sprinkled throughout. So we will move on to the next slide. So this slide is entitled Submissions. And just so by way of reminder, for folks who are maybe new to using Submittable, however, if you're really familiar with the platform, you can skip ahead in the presentation. Submittable is an online portal MRAC uses to manage our grant applications and to communicate with applicants and grantees about their proposals and their projects. To submit your flexible support grant application, sign into Submittable using your email, or if this is your first time using Submittable, create an account by visiting www.submittable.com/login. So submittable.com/login. And then I'm going to do an image description of what's on the screen right now. So on the right-hand side, there's a screenshot image of what the Submittable login looks like. And you'll see the information that prompts for your email address and other things. If you do find that you have any technical issues navigating Submittable, please connect with Submittable's tech support team by visiting their help page. Again, this is slide 22, so there's a link on here that you can reference. However, if you go to this webinar, you'll find these links on the YouTube page and also on our website. Note, you can only submit one flexible support application per group, and there will be 2 parts to a full submission. So again, during this presentation, we'll do a review of the eligibility form, and then afterwards we will discuss the second part of the form entitled Part 2, Flexible Support, or Part 2, FY2025 Flexible Support Proposal Form. And then we'll go on to the next slide. So I do want to read just a couple of reminders again. So on your screen, you'll see a title that says reminders about submissions. And I'll just read each bullet point. So, reminders. You will type your responses into text boxes online. Bullet points are acceptable. There are character counts included that include letters, numbers, spaces, and paragraph breaks. So that's just something to keep in mind, that while you're typing, all of the spaces are considered character counts, as well as the letters and numbers. And then the next bullet point is, do not include hyperlinks or links to websites in the narrative text field. The application system will automatically save your work every few minutes, but some applicants may wish to work in a template. And then applicants may not change or edit applications after the deadline. So these are just a few useful reminders for you to reference. We'll go on to the next slide.
All right, thank you, Sagira. And I will likely mention again those reminders. So we're going to start here with part 1. I will read what is on the slide, and then I will switch over to what you as an applicant will see on submittables. So first bullet point here, the site is titled Part 1 Eligibility Form. First bullet point is, if ineligible, the form will not specify why. If you've been eligible in the past and or are new and would like someone to review the form, please connect with us to discuss it further. The second bullet point says you do have to pass this form to fill out the second part of the application. For you to have submitted a full submission, you do need to submit both the eligibility form and the Part 2 form. All right. Okay, I'm switching screens. Part 1 is here, and we are on the preview. I won't read all of the questions, but Part 1 will look like this with the eligibility form. You'll have questions. The first ones are about your organization / group. You'll select options. There's a reminder here too for returning applicants. Again, this is a lot of text, so don't be shy or nervous about reaching out. It can be confusing. And then your project eligibility is the second part of this form, and you'll answer some questions. And then you'll submit the form. You can also save this as a draft and come back to it. All right, so now we're going back to the presentation and moving on to Part 2. This is what we'd like to spend a little more time in. So first I'll read this slide and then we'll walk through what an application would look like and how all of this actually plays out in real life. So the title is Part 2, FY2025, Flexible Support Proposal Form. The first bullet point is branching, and it's in bold, and it's a vocab word at MRAC. What it means is that submittable allows us to branch out questions based on your response. So this means that some questions will only become visible once you respond to the first questions provided. In the guidelines, you will see how all of the branching questions show up. In other words, every possible question that we could ask, regardless of what type of group you are, is in the guidelines. And this allows us to tailor the application to the specific type of group. And I'll provide examples to demonstrate how this actually plays out. The second bullet point is that not all sections are visible to panelists. We encourage folks to really spend time, obviously make sure you're eligible, but then be aware or mindful that like the narrative is what is actually being scored and what will determine if you're funded or not. With that, I will switch over to Part 2. The submittable Part 2 submission is loading. Okay, and we're here. So this is what you would see on submittable. The first part is general information about your organization / group. Make sure y'all are eligible, so you'll type in your name, then phone number, your address, a website. This is the only space, like Sagira said, this is the only space where you will put your website. Do not include websites anywhere else. And if you include it in this optional space, we will use it when promoting your funded project on May 1st. So it can be another way for others in the community to get connected with you. And then I already have some options selected here, so I am going to erase it. And we're going to erase all of these things here. I was playing around with it. All right, we're going to start as a fiscally sponsored group. So I would select that as my organization type. And as you can see, the questions changed. You no longer had the other options. We get this instead. So it talks about your fiscal sponsor form, talks about what is considered an eligible fiscal sponsor. And we just reiterate that the deadline is on October 21st by 11:59 p.m. Central Time. So like I mentioned earlier, if you have a fiscal sponsor, you will put their email here. You can add your own personal message, but like I demonstrated earlier in this presentation, we already do have a template. But if you know this person and you're like, please do this by tomorrow, or we talked, can you take a look? Go ahead and do that and you'll send the request. So then it'll ask you your legal status. These are options that come from the Minnesota State Arts Board. So obviously, like we mentioned already, individuals are ineligible, but you're a fiscally sponsored group. So you'd actually select the 02 code. Then we could be museum art, you could be performing group. Again, not an individual because that's not eligible here at MRAC, or not at MRAC's flexible support grant. And then we'll say music as the discipline code. I want to mention here that for the fiscal year, I already gave an example. If your fiscal year typically runs from January 1st to December 31st, the most recently completed fiscal year would be December 31st, 2023, because we haven't completed fiscal year 2024. Often we also do see here at MRAC groups that haven't even been in existence for a full fiscal year. Don't worry, you won't be penalized. That's not an issue. What we would just ask you to do is select today's date. So whatever day, if we see, so what day is it today? July 19th. If we see July 19th, it's like, oh, okay, they're brand new. And even more so, if you go to this next section and it says your organization / group arts expenses. So let's just say you're a brand new group, you haven't completed a full year. We put in today's date, and then we would say 0 because we haven't completed a full fiscal year, so we have nothing to report on. Again, won't be penalized. It's not an eligibility thing. This is the reality of your group. So then we move on to the next section. This section here is art participation. Two big things. This is not limited to only MRAC funded activity. Any arts programming that you've done, regardless of who funded it, you can put those numbers in here. This is the second one, is that this is for the most recently completed fiscal year. So if I'm still acting out an applicant from a fiscal sponsor group that hasn't completed a fiscal year, so that's why I put today's date, why I put $0. I'd also put 0 because we haven't completed a full fiscal year, so we don't have any numbers to report on. Not an issue. That's the reality for your group. All right, so now I will play out, well, let me keep going as this fiscal sponsor. This was an example for a 501c3, so ignore that. As a fiscally sponsored group, you want at least 3 leaders. Don't include the leaders of your fiscal sponsor. Only the leaders of your group. And because you're a fiscally sponsored group, include the first and last name, and then their roles could be lead artist, graphic designer, and maybe an outreach person. Those are totally acceptable as a fiscally sponsored group. All right, I'm gonna save the rest of the application for once we go through what it would be like if you are a arts or a nonprofit. So we're going back to select your organization type. We're going to say we're a 501c3, federally tax exempt nonprofit organization. As you saw, the questions changed. You would select your type. I will say we're an arts 501c3. We would code ourselves as a 02, our legal status, because we're an organization nonprofit. We can keep the code, we're a museum and we do music stuff. We'll keep all that. As you see, this is a new question. This was not in the previous, when we were acting out as a fiscally sponsored, but as a nonprofit, you do have to include your EIN. We do check it to make sure that it is active. So you would enter in that number there. The same applies here with the fiscal year. So if you're a brand new 501c3 nonprofit, you put today's date. If you've completed a fiscal year, you put the date of your most recently completed fiscal year. So for this one, we'll act as though we're not new. We have a year under our belts and we have a typical fiscal year, which January 1st to December 31st. So I'll put December 31st, 2023 as the date for the most recently completed fiscal year. Because we're an Arts 501c3, we would include our entire budget for the organization. And let's say we have total budget of $210,000. Make sure I have all the zeros. Yes, okay. This is below the $400,000 threshold, so y'all are fine and can keep on going. And now for arts participation, we did complete a year. We had 20 adult participants. We're youth focused, so maybe we had 300 youth participants. And we did a few online events, and there were a couple hundred, say 200, that engaged with us online through some online programming. All right, so now this is new for everyone. So fiscally sponsored, nonprofits, community education units, public entities. This leadership section, well, actually, this is where I want to highlight for any nonprofit, community education unit, public entity, please, please, please make sure that when you are listing people here, you include the chair, the treasurer, all other board members, and the executive director or an equivalent. We have examples in the guidelines. We won't go over this too much, but just make sure that this is in your leadership list. These are staff, and we'll be using them as our example for our fake nonprofit that we created. And based on these 4 individuals, again, you need at least 3. So we have 4 and we're good, we're a group. And let's say we put in an eligible EIN number, we have all our IRS documentation in order. We are now going to keep going down this application, and I would list the total number of leaders, which 4 for this scenario. I've already put some information in here for our staff listed. And so we just, one tip or reminder here is count staff once or leaders once, because this total number of leaders should equal the same number of leaders you listed on this question. So let me make sure you could see that. So total number of leaders, this number here, should equal total number of leaders here. And it should also equal the total number of leaders listed. All right. Based on the data that I provided in here, we have 3 that identify as BIPOC. And then we move on to the next section. Again, only include folks once, don't count them more than once, because we want this number to equal the same number that we've seen above. In this one, I already included some numbers here. And what it shows now is that all 4 of the staff identify with the BIPOC, LGBTQIA2+, and or disabled. So that's important, because when you divide this number by the total number of leaders, if you do it there, you will be able to answer this next question that will show up for everyone. And I'll read it out loud. So the question I just referenced was, is your organization/group leadership comprised of 51% or more people who identify as BIPOC and or LGBTQIA2+ and or disabled person/person with disabilities? You can say yes or no. Again, I have a few things to say here. So the first one is, if you're a nonprofit and you do not include all the leaders that you have to include, so for example, if you don't include the chair, but you say, yes, we are disabled led, because we don't have all of the data and it's missing information, you would actually not be eligible for the $25,000. That's why it's so important, and that's why we're emphasizing it here. If everything is in order, so like in this case, we we made sure everyone was listed and made sure that those roles were the ones that are asked for in the guidelines are there. And we are BIPOC led in this scenario. And again, you can be LGBTQIA2+ led, you can be disabled led, and you can also have folks, for example, if in this situation, if we had one who identified as BIPOC, one that identified as LGBTQIA2+, and one that was disabled, and one that didn't identify with any of those identities, 3 of the 4 still identify with these communities. This can be tricky, this can be math, and so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And again, if this isn't information that you want to ask, or it's not information that's available, you can say no. You can say that you're not going to disclose or you don't know them in both of the tables that we just listed or we just discussed. And then you would be eligible for up to $15,000. And so this question, yes or no, is really important because it's also a branching question, which will lead to a budget, and it'll let you either request up to $15,000 or up to $25,000. We do have a new section here. It's optional. Again, none of the things that we've gone over so far, except for your organization name and your fiscal sponsor name, is visible to panelists. This is all eligibility stuff, which is important, but just so y'all are aware of how this application is broken down into. So this next question here, you are free to self-identify. The identities that we listed above in the tables, the race and ethnicity table, is those are identities given to us by the Minnesota State Arts Board, and they're for reporting purposes, which is great and all, but we also recognize that they are not accurate or all-encompassing. And like we said in the above tables, you only can identify with one of them. And so we really wanted to create a space here for folks to self-identify. So for example, is your organization, you might say they're disabled led, but is there a specific community that better describes how you as a group or applicant identify? Or for example, with the race and ethnicity, like you might identify as Black and you might also choose mixed race and or Hispanic or Asian, and that multiracial identity doesn't feel like it is captured in saying multiracial. So this is a space to really choose how you identify and to help us better understand who our applicants are. With that, we'll move on to additional identities that you can select. This doesn't have to be a majority here. This one is if anybody identifies with these identities. We'll move on to the narrative. It is split into, I would say, 3 different sections. So the first one is about your organization / group. And we won't go through all the questions, but they are available on Submittable in the guidelines. And like Segura mentioned, we do have a narrative if you prefer to work on that. And I will show y'all how to find that. So if you go to our webpage, our flexible support webpage, back to other grant documents, it is the first bullet point. And then we'll skip to the next section, which is the project / program design. And these questions are exactly the same as last year. There were some minor character changes. Folks had asked for a little bit more space. And so that is what you are now seeing here, but the questions are the same as last year. The third section is arts access. And lastly, we have your budget. So we listed some examples. You don't have to use these. There is additional space for you to enter in other expenses. And because I selected yes, we are 51% or more of the leaders that identify as BIPOC, LGBTQIA2+ or disabled. We have a max budget of $25,000. And this is only for MRAC expenses. So please don't include more than the 25 or more than the 15,000. Only what you're requesting from MRAC. And then here is where you would select your proposal end date, which I had mentioned earlier, and then your final report is due 2 months after that date. And for this year, it is May 31st, 2026. You cannot include a date after that, so you will see that. You will select a discipline code. This section here is for the project you're proposing. And a special note that even if you're requesting money to pay for salary or rent, you wouldn't select 0 because you're still going to do arts programming. And so estimate what that number would be. And these are estimates. I want to emphasize that once you come to the final report, it'll also be a rough estimate of how many folks you think you engaged with or were able to involve. So you'll select some outcomes, an evaluation plan, and then you will read this statement here and say agree or you do not agree. We had this happen last year. If for some reason you say you do not agree, it'll be an error message. And you can select we do not agree, but that means you wouldn't be eligible to receive an award. So all your work would have been for nothing. So please read that, make sure you understand and agree, and go ahead and submit when you're ready. You can also save your draft. That was a lot of information. I recognize that. So go ahead and change the playback speed. We're now back on to the presentation, and we have 3 more slides and we'll be wrapping up. So I will pass it to Sagira.
Thank you, Maria. So I'm just going to read what's on the screen. This slide is entitled Reminders. All submissions and support materials, including complete fiscal sponsor forms, if applicable, must be submitted by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time on October 21st, 2024. Not afterwards. I recommend if you can do it way before that time frame because, portals can be finicky, but that is the deadline. We won't accept submissions after the deadline. If you do not have access to a computer or internet, do contact us at least 2 weeks before the deadline and we will support you in being able to apply. So do not let that be a barrier for you. Reach out to us. Staff assistance is available until 5 p.m. on the deadline day. We have all kinds of support we can offer you, so just keep that in mind. Reach out to us. And then also have an active email address you check often. We frequently communicate. Typically, that communication happens via email or via submittable through email. So check your email settings to make sure that the emails that we send through the submittable portal aren't filtered into your spam folder, which can happen sometimes. But just keep in mind that we might reach out to have answer any clarifying questions that we have after the deadline. And then again, just to emphasize that we may contact you at any point, so just be aware of that. We'll move on to the next slide. So this slide is entitled, What to Do if Awarded this Grant. This is the exciting part. So you got the grant, you got the shmoney, you want to know what to do? We're here to help you. So I'm going to read the first 3 bullet points. The first thing that you have to do is you have to sign the grant agreement and upload a W-9 for the group or fiscal sponsor dated within this fiscal year. So July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. So we can't give you any money until you sign that agreement and send us the documents that we need. And then the second bullet point is checks are issued to a group's or fiscal sponsor's address. So that's something to keep in mind. The third bullet point is consider attending our optional online discussion with recent grantees on May 6th, 2025, 1 to 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. So this will be a virtual and optional online discussion, as Maria talked about earlier, to support you through the process. One thing to keep in mind is that grantees also need to use appropriate language and logos on all promotion of the funded activities. We have support materials for that. And then the next bullet point is to communicate changes, project changes ahead of time. So we recognize at MRAC that sometimes things happen, and then the project that you submitted, needs to be adjusted in some way. We're fine with that, but we do require that you reach out to your assigned program director. So Maria and I both get assignments for different grantees. You have to submit your project chain requests in Submittable. There are links that will be provided for you to get a direct link to that. And then once you submit that form, we automatically get notified. There's a review process that has a little bit of a lag time just due to the high volume of forms and requests that we receive. And so just to set your own expectations, it could be anywhere from a week or to 2 weeks, sometimes even more depending on before we can respond to your requests. So get them in soon so that we can respond and hopefully approve or things of that nature. Some examples of project changes that I do want to just offer you all, just so you have those in mind. So one example of a project change request could be changing the proposal end date, changing grant project timelines. You can have changes to the expenses or budgets that are over $500 per budget item, changes in the venue and or changes in personnel. All project changes, like I said, must be approved by a program director in your final report submission. So just, or in your project change submission, my apologies. So please communicate ahead of time with us and expect a wait time, like I said. And then let's see. I just want to emphasize too that most of the times when we're approving these project changes, we're just trying to avoid any ineligibilities or activities and expenses that would result in an ineligibility. And so we do need those project change request forms so that you don't have to return the funds. So it is kind of serious. And then I want to go on just to remind you all for the acknowledgement logo and language that I mentioned before. Just review your grant agreement or visit our grant acknowledgement page on our website by hovering the Manage My Grant tab and clicking on the grant acknowledgement. There, you're going to find information about how you can acknowledge MRAC and support materials. You'll also find a YouTube video that has that information. I think Maria shared the screen a little bit, but also, again, you can go to the website to find that information. So there it is.
I'm using your instructions that you just said. So yes, manage my grant. You can click on that and you'll find resources, grant agreement, final report. And then you can also go to grant acknowledge. So if you go to the homepage at MRAC and then you go to hover over manage my grant, go down to the grant acknowledgement. This is the video that Segura was referring to.
Thank you, Maria. And then there's one more part to the thing that you can do after you get this grant award. So you've got your award, you filled out your grant agreements, maybe you had a project change and it was approved, maybe not, and then you've completed your project. So it's really important, especially if you intend to reapply in the future for funding from MRAC, for you to submit your final report, but also, even if you don't apply again, we need a final report. So you have a 2-month window of time to submit those. So final report process at MRAC is actually really simple. Do your best to just track information like how you actually spent the money and the attendance numbers and addresses. At the end of the day, these are just, best estimates, and we encourage you to prioritize and to spend all the funds and do your best to do the proposed activities that you described in your original proposal. But again, if something did change, acknowledge that in your final report. Like I said, you have to submit your final report within 2 months of your project end date. Late final reports may prevent you from being eligible to apply for future funding with MRAC. Lastly, if you are awarded a grant, your grant email in your submittable application will include links and information about these requirements. So no pressure. If you forget anything or need a refresher, when notifications actually go out, we'll remind you of all of these things. And then, like I said, we'll have that optional May 6th online webinar that you can attend, and you can also rewatch this video. We'll go on to the next slide.
All right, thank you, Sakira. So this is our last slide. It says, thank you for meeting Espino and Sakira Shahid. Minnesotan voters made these funds possible back in 2008. And on this slide, we have two images. We have the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment logo, and also the state of Minnesota. So since 2008, all who pay sales taxes keep these funds going. And so thank you so much. Again, don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, I will stop sharing the screen. And then Sigir, if you could stop recording.
Yeah, I do also want to just thank our ASL interpreters as well. Thank you both for offering access in this way. And then we'll end the presentation.